Thank you, Madam President. I rise today to discuss the confirmation process for Judge Brett Kavanaugh. For the last few weeks, Democrats have complained endlessly about documents. First, they said there weren't enough documents. Then, when the Judiciary Committee released a record-breaking number of documents, Democrats complained that there wasn't enough time to review them all. They then complained that the documents were not public. When we made the documents public, Democrats were disappointed to find that they contained no smoking gun. There has been much ado about documents, but in the end, it's much ado about nothing. One thing I've learned many of my colleagues say is that because we reviewed all of Justice Elena Kagan's records from her time in the executive branch, we must review every last scrap of paper that crossed Judge Kavanaugh's desk while he was in the executive branch. That just isn't so. When Justice Kagan was nominated, the Senate did not ask for, nor did it receive, all of her records from her time in the Obama administration. In fact, the Senate never requested, and the Obama administration never provided, any of Justice Kagan's records from her time as Solicitor General. And they certainly didn't ask for every document from the Solicitor General's office that contained a mere reference to Justice Kagan, quote, by name, initials, or title, unquote. Producing sensitive internal deliberations and other documents from the Solicitor General's office would have been extraordinarily inappropriate and even damaging to the executive branch, which is exactly why the Senate did not ask for Justice Kagan's records. This decision was especially difficult because Justice Kagan had no judicial records to review. By contrast, we have over 12 years of Judge Kavanaugh's rulings on the D.C. Circuit. These rulings, which my Democratic colleagues are reluctant to even acknowledge, let alone talk about, are the most relevant documents for evaluating what type of justice Judge Kavanaugh will be. Judge Kavanaugh's court decisions are highly relevant to understanding his legal reasoning. The same can't be said of his White House documents, which more accurately reflect the conveyor belt process for presidential decision-making. Those who argue that they need every document that even mentions Judge Kavanaugh are only now realizing the absurdity of this argument. At this point, Democrats are simply stalling for time. They made no effort to make their proposals any less unreasonable, and Senator Grassley rightly rejected them. By now, Americans are starting to see through the ruse. The real objective of these ridiculous demands is to delay Judge Kavanaugh's hearing, to delay his inevitable confirmation. Last week, Senator Grassley announced that the hearing for Judge Kavanaugh would start on September 4th, immediately. Democrats insisted that the committee is rushing to hold Judge Kavanaugh's confirmation hearing. But the hearings for the last three nominees, Justice Sonia Sotomayor, Elena Kagan, and Neil Gorsuch, were all held 48 or 49 days after the president announced their nominations. By comparison, Judge Kavanaugh's hearing will start 57 days after his nomination was announced. Apparently, the Judiciary Committee is in such a rush that it has given senators an extra week to review the nominees' records. The left is pushing the false narrative that Republicans are rushing to hold Judge Kavanaugh's hearing. Progressives are doing this in an attempt to muddy the waters. They're hoping that people will focus on spurious process arguments rather than diving into Kavanaugh's judicial record, which is all but unassailable. Last week, a number of my colleagues tried to make hay out of the fact that the Judiciary Committee received some documents about Judge Kavanaugh on a confidential basis. These colleagues said it was a travesty that they were not being made public. But they knew then that these documents were being reviewed so that important information like Social Security numbers and other similar personal information could be redacted and removed. In the meantime, the senators and their staff were given access to the documents right away so that they could review them for the upcoming hearing. In any event, the criticism that documents were being kept confidential was quickly blown apart. Chairman Grassley recently made public more than 103,000 pages of materials from Judge Kavanaugh's time in the executive branch. And more materials are on the way. Most laughable of all, some on the left are now claiming that because there's no smoking gun in the documents, surely the production process must be nefarious. Maybe the huge number of documents is just too boring for Judge Kavanaugh's opponents to sift through, or maybe they've looked through the documents already and know the American people have nothing to complain about. Consider the damning evidence already uncovered in these documents. Judge Kavanaugh goes to church on Sunday morning. He appreciates pizza when he's working late. He thought the last play of a Redskins game was, quote, a total disgrace, unquote. Mr. President, Madam President, if these mundanities aren't grounds for disqualification, then what is? What more do we have to learn about Judge Kavanaugh before we can see him for what he truly is? Joseph Stalin without the mustache, or as one of my colleagues so calmly put it, a man who will, quote, pave the pave to tyranny, unquote. If I could tell the American people one thing today, it would be this. Judge Kavanaugh may seem like the human incarnation of a vanilla ice cream cone, but he's actually something far more sinister. Judging by the rhetoric coming from the left, I'm convinced that this minivan driving carpool dad is actually the second coming of Genghis Khan. Now, I have no evidence for this assertion, not right now anyways, but Madam President, if Chairman Grassley would just give us a few more years to read over each and every one of Judge Kavanaugh's work emails and maybe even every handwritten note he passed back in grade school, I'm sure we will find something. Because there's no way Democrats are just making this stuff up, I hope this isn't too much to ask. Naturally, I'm being facetious, only to prove a point. We have more than we need to determine Judge Kavanaugh's fitness for the Supreme Court. Based on the number of documents alone, this will be the most thorough vetting of a Supreme Court nominee in our nation's history. And I've only been here 42 years, but I can tell you this is the most thorough vetting of a Supreme Court nominee in our nation's history. We should call this hubbub about documents for what it really is. A naked partisan ploy, a red herring meant to distract the American people from Judge Kavanaugh's indisputable credentials. Watching this confirmation unfold is like watching the tortured last moments of a blowout basketball game. Democrats are down 30 with 10 seconds left, but they keep fouling to stop the shot clock in an attempt to avoid their inevitable defeat. Enough already. Madam President, it's time Democrats come home from their fishing trip. We could spend eons angling for scandal in the river of documents the Judiciary Committee has provided us, but nothing will bite, because there's nothing there. Democrats know this by now, and it's time they admit it to the American people. The longer they wait, the more desperate they look. To my progressive colleagues, and I really laugh at that word progressive. They're anything but progressive. They're regressive. But I'll call them progressive today. To my progressive colleagues, I say this: let's not waste any more time. By now, it's evident to even the most committed partisans that Judge Kavanaugh is supremely qualified for the Supreme Court. So stop playing politics and join us in supporting his confirmation.